You believe the Soviet Union had to collapse in 1991. It did not. It came down to 3 military units refusing an order on a Tuesday morning, December 25th, 1991. Is the date the red flag came down in our history. But history is fragile. It is a coin flip. Look at the coin. August 20th, 1991, Moscow. In your timeline, the tanks rolled in and stopped. The soldiers looked at the crowds of ordinary citizens and froze. Boris Yeltsin stood on a tank, yelled into a megaphone, and won. The coup leaders lost their nerve. They drank too much vodka, hesitated, and let the state slip through their fingers. Now, change one detail. The commander of the elite Alpha group does not hesitate. He receives the order at 3 a.m. to clear the Russian parliament. The heavy metal tears through the plastic and wood. The crowd scatters. Those who stay are crushed. Yeltsin is dragged out of the building in handcuffs before he can speak to a single camera. By sunrise, the state television channels play classical music. No news. No protests. Tchaikovsky on a loop. The coup did not fail. It succeeded. The air in Moscow on August 21st, 1991, smells of diesel and wet asphalt. Rain had fallen early in the morning. By noon, the tanks of the state could be defended. The message was clear. Power now belonged to those willing to use it. You were taught that the Soviet Union collapsed because it was inevitable. But on August 20th, 1991, at 3:42 in the morning, the entire superpower hung on a single phone call that went the other way. History is fragile. We pretend it has a script. It does not. It has trigger points. Moscow was silent. Cold rain washed the granite streets. Yellow streetlights painted long, oily reflections across the wet asphalt. To any citizen looking out a window, the capital appeared asleep. It looked peaceful. It was not. Beneath that quiet surface, the largest empire on earth was choking. Outside the Russian parliament building, known as the White House, thousands of citizens waited. They stood in the dark. Factory workers, university students, gray-haired veterans with medals tucked inside their coats, parents holding plastic sheets over their children. Most had never joined a protest. Most had spent their lives keeping their heads down. But tonight, they believed they were shielding the future. They built barricades out of municipal buses, construction cranes, and rusted steel fences. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. Inside the building, Boris Yeltsin refused to flee. Hours earlier, he had climbed onto the cold steel of a T-72 tank. He had read a proclamation condemning the coup leaders. The photograph of that moment was already flying across global news wires, a politician standing against the Soviet state. Around him, advisors worked telephones. Messages moved between rooms. Supporters prepared for an assault. On August 24th, 1991, the Soviet Union died on paper, but the tanks in Kyiv never turned off their engines. 3 blocks from Independence Square, thousands of civilians stood behind makeshift barricades, staring down armored vehicles that were waiting for a single order to fire. The diesel exhaust filled the summer air. Soldiers sat inside the steel hulls. They waited. No one knew who would pull the trigger first. 4 days earlier, the military had fired on protesters in Moscow. 3 people died on the cold asphalt of the Garden Ring. Everyone in Kyiv knew what that meant. You tear the second largest republic away by force. It was a calculation of raw math. Inside the parliament building, the air was thick with sweat and panic. Deputies screamed at each other for 6 hours. Some wanted to declare independence immediately. They wanted a clean break. They feared the tanks. Then, a single document hit the table. It was not a speech. It was an economic ledger. Ukraine produced more than 20% of Soviet food. Its factories built aircraft, ships, missiles, heavy machinery. Its territory contained military bases and strategic weapons. If Ukraine left the Soviet Union, the economic shock would be enormous. You think the Cold War ended when the red flag came down? It did not. On January 25, 1995, the world almost ended in 6 minutes. That is how long the radar room at Olenegorsk had to make a decision. A scientific rocket rose from the coast of Norway. It was a Black Brant, the 12th research vehicle on Soviet radar screens. Its trajectory looked identical to a Trident missile launched from a submarine. It looked like an incoming high-altitude nuclear strike designed to blind Soviet defenses. 6 minutes to possible impact. 5, 4. President Antonov stood beside the nuclear command console. For the first time in history, the Szeged nuclear briefcase was fully activated. The keys were inserted. The codes were ready. No one moved. No one spoke. The air in the room was thick with the smell of old coffee and fear. Every officer in that room knew the mathematics of doom. If the warning was real, Moscow had to launch hundreds of warheads before the sky burned. Washington would fire back within minutes. Europe would turn to ash. The atmosphere would burn. Billions would die in the dark. Then the trajectory shifted. The object moved away. It was heading toward Spitsbergen. It was not a weapon. The general next to Antonov exhaled. He lowered his hand. He said it was not an attack. The briefcase closed. No announcement was made. No television station reported how close the world had come to disaster. The scientific rocket continued into the upper atmosphere, and humanity continued into another year. But inside the Kremlin, something changed. Antonov had seen the weakness of the new world. The Cold War was alive, but the systems designed to control it were built for another age. One mistake, one radar error, one misunderstood launch could erase everything. He ordered a direct, encrypted digital network between Moscow and Washington. Not out of friendship, out of terror. President Bill Clinton accepted. Washington had spent years expecting the Soviet Union to rot from within. They thought the collapse was inevitable. They were wrong. Instead of dying, the empire mutated. It was not the stagnant economy of the 1970s anymore. It was not the idealistic state of 1917. It became a hybrid, authoritarian, commercial, tech-focused, still nuclear, still deeply suspicious. The 20th century was closing, and the two systems were locked in a new race. But this battlefield had no walls, no barbed wire, no concrete barriers. It was invisible. It was moving into your home. By 1997, the internet was swallowing the West. Homes connected for the first time. The sound of dial-up modems filled living rooms from Boston to Seattle. Moscow saw a new border to defend. They built Sovnet. It linked Moscow, Kyiv, Minsk, and Almaty through government gateways. You could access Western sites, but only if you waited. Only if the state approved. The KGB did not need to steam open your mail anymore. They owned the server. They logged every keystroke. They built data centers in Siberia to store your digital footprint. Young Soviet citizens learned how to evade the restrictions. Proxy systems, copied software, foreign servers, underground networks. Every censorship system created a new generation of people trying to break it. The state built walls. Engineers built tunnels. A young programmer in Kyiv named Maxim Volkov spent his nights inside a university laboratory. By day, he worked on Soviet networking software. By night, he connected to foreign systems through a hidden route across Poland, American forums, German universities, Japanese software archives. For the first time, he saw a digital world without Soviet borders. He whispered to himself, "This is bigger than any country." He was right. And governments around the world were beginning to understand the same thing. Eastern Europe had become the most dangerous political fault line on Earth. Poland wanted full NATO membership. Hungary wanted security guarantees. The Czech Republic wanted integration with the West. Moscow opposed all of it. For years, diplomats had negotiated temporary compromises. Military exercises were limited. Nuclear weapons stayed farther from Soviet borders. In Warsaw, a Polish prime minister spoke before parliament. "We escaped one empire. We will not wait for another to decide our future." The chamber rose in applause. 2 weeks later, Poland formally requested NATO membership. Moscow reacted immediately. Soviet television called the application a strategic provocation. Troops moved into Belarus. Air defense systems were reinforced. Missile units conducted public exercises. Washington faced a difficult choice: reject Poland, and America would appear to accept a Soviet sphere of influence. Accept Poland, and the alliance would move directly towards Soviet territory. President Clinton chose a compromise. Poland would receive a formal security partnership. Not full NATO membership, not yet. American aircraft could train on Polish soil. Military equipment could be supplied, but permanent foreign bases would be limited. Then a different crisis changed the global agenda. September 11th, 2001. The United States was attacked. Passenger aircraft struck the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. For the first time since 1991, Washington and Moscow faced an enemy neither controlled. President Antonov called the White House within hours. The Soviet Union condemned the attacks. Intelligence was offered. Airspace across Central Asia was opened for limited American operations against Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. For a brief moment, the Cold War paused. Not ended, paused. The United States invaded Afghanistan. But unlike our history, the geography was far more complicated. Much of Central Asia remained inside the Soviet Union. Every flight required negotiation with Moscow. Every supply route was political. Washington needed the Soviet Union to fight a war near its own borders. Antonov used the opportunity. He offered logistical support. In exchange, Washington reduced pressure for NATO expansion. Sanctions connected to Soviet political repression were eased. The two superpowers cooperated against terrorism, while still distrusting each other almost everywhere else. Inside the Soviet Union, the government used the global war on terrorism for its own purposes. Separatist movements in the Caucasus were labeled extremist threats. Security laws expanded. Surveillance increased. Political opposition found less room to operate. In 2003, the United States prepared to invade Iraq. Moscow opposed the operation, not because it supported Saddam Hussein completely, but because it feared a world where Washington could overthrow governments without Soviet approval. At the United Nations, the confrontation was unmistakable. American diplomats argued that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction. Soviet diplomats demanded more inspections. The invasion still happened. Baghdad still fell. But the consequences were different. Moscow increased military cooperation with Iran. It strengthened ties with Syria. It expanded energy deals across the Middle East. Then China entered the equation. For decades, Beijing had modernized its economy. Manufacturing expanded. Exports exploded. Cities transformed. The Soviet Union had once considered China a rival inside the communist world. Now Moscow saw something else. A partner against American dominance. In 2005, Antonov traveled to Beijing. A new strategic partnership was announced. Not an alliance, not officially. But Washington understood what it meant. The international system was no longer bipolar. 3 centers of power, 3 different models, 3 different visions for the future. The Soviet economy was stronger than it had been in 1991, not because central planning had returned, because it had not. Energy exports funded the state. Private companies operated under political limits. Technology firms grew inside Sovnet. A Soviet citizen in 2005 could buy a Japanese television, a German car, a Soviet computer, drink American soda, and still live under a government that controlled national television, political parties, and the military. The contradiction had become the system. But Ukraine was still waiting beneath everything. Its autonomy had expanded year after year. Kyiv traded with Europe. Western Ukraine looked toward Poland and Germany. Eastern Ukraine remained economically tied to Russia and Soviet industry. In 2006, a presidential election in Ukraine created a crisis. The pro-Moscow candidate claimed victory. Opposition leaders accused the government of fraud. Hundreds of thousands entered Kyiv's streets. Orange banners filled Independence Square. Maxim Volkov was now a 30-something tech leader. He stood in Independence Square. This time, the protesters did not need underground labs. They had mobile phones. They used encrypted Sovnet channels to move crowds before the police could react. The state's own network was being used to dismantle the state. Moscow wanted the square cleared. But you cannot hide a massacre when everyone has a camera. Antonov's advisors warned him. Violence would kill foreign investment, the military warned him. Some units might refuse to fire. Antonov chose to bend. The election was run again. The opposition won. For the first time, a major Soviet republic elected a government openly demanding greater independence from Moscow. The Soviet constitution allowed autonomy. It did not allow secession. Ukraine had now reached the edge of that line. Washington watched carefully. So did Warsaw, Berlin, Beijing. Every capital understood the stakes. If Ukraine left the Soviet Union, the entire federal structure could unravel. Belarus might demand more independence. The Caucasus could explode. Central Asia could follow. The empire saved in 1991 might still collapse 15 years later. You believe your borders keep you safe. They do not. In March 2012, 3 computer monitors in Kyiv proved that a line of code can bypass every military radar on Earth. Maxim Volkov stood in his server room. The air was hot. It smelled of ozone and warm plastic. Rows of black machines blinked under harsh fluorescent lights. Every single screen showed the same warning. Unauthorized access, multiple systems, multiple cities. The attack was spreading, but it was moving slowly, carefully, almost politely. That was the terrifying part. Criminal hackers are always noisy. They want cash. They steal passwords. They lock your data and demand a ransom. Political activists want attention. They leave digital graffiti. They post loud threats. This attack did none of those things. It entered. It looked around. It copied the structure of the network. Then it moved on. No damage. No demands. No digital signature. Someone was studying the Soviet Union. They were mapping the veins of the state. Maxim called the National Cybersecurity Office. The line crackled. The voice on the other end was tense. "We already know," the officer said. "How many systems are hit?" A long pause followed. "More than yours. Is the government compromised?" "Yes." "The military?" Another silence. "Yes." Maxim looked at his engineers. Their faces were pale. What about the energy grid? Some of it. The railways? Some. Banking? Also, the room became cold. The attacker did not want a single target. 3 nuclear superpowers had their launch systems triggered by the exact same line of code. It happened at 2:18 a.m. The red phones in Washington, Moscow, and Beijing all rang at once. 3 governments had spent 50 years preparing to destroy one another. Now they were trying to stop a war that no one could explain. Inside the Soviet command bunker, President Morozov listened to corrupted data. Technicians screamed, power grids failed, rail systems froze, military networks switched to emergency protocols. Somewhere in the dark, malicious code kept moving. The American president spoke first. He said they had launched detection problems on several systems. Morozov closed his eyes. He admitted the Soviets had the same issue. The Chinese leader spoke next. They had it too. No one said anything for several seconds. The silence was terrifying because all 3 understood the same possibility. A false warning could become a real launch. The old Cold War relied on physical radar. This new world relied on networks. Networks are easy to fool. A corrupted signal looks like an incoming missile. A broken wire looks like sabotage. An automated defense system can decide to launch before a human even blinks. Morozov turned to his chief of staff. He ordered him to disconnect everything that could launch without human confirmation. The chief hesitated. He said it would slow down their response time. Across the Soviet Union, nuclear units received emergency orders. Manual authorization only. No automated retaliation. No launch without 2 independent command confirmations. You think the Soviet Union ended in 1991? It did not. On January 1st, 2026, the red flag still flies over Moscow, but the country beneath it is unrecognizable. Look at the snow falling on Red Square. It is midnight. Thousands of people fill the streets. Children sit on shoulders. Phones rise above the crowd to capture the light. Music echoes off the stone walls. Then, the Kremlin clock strikes 12. Fireworks explode above Moscow. And right there, under the fire in the sky, the red banner remains. 35 years. That is how long we have been told the Soviet experiment was dead. In the history books you read, December 1991 was the end. The flag came down. The Russian Federation took the nuclear codes. America won. The Cold War ended, not here. In this timeline, the Union survived. It did not stay the same. It could not. It is not the massive 15-republic giant from the old maps. The Baltic states broke away early. Ukraine left peacefully in 2023. Georgia negotiated a loose, separate deal. They are still bound together. It is a federal system that would make Lenin turn in his grave. The name is on the map. The flag flies. The army marches. But the system inside is different. The Soviet Union of 2026 does not care about global communist revolution. It does not try to ban private property. It does not run every single grocery store or shoe factory. They call it a social federal republic. The state keeps its grip on the big pieces: oil, gas, weapons, nuclear plants, space hardware. But everything else? It is open. It is a strange world to walk through. You can start a business. You can make millions of rubles. You can buy an iPhone. You can fly to Paris. You can trade crypto. You can own a high-rise apartment, but you still live under a government that owns the news. A government that crushes opposition groups before they can start. A government that watches your internet traffic closer than any Western state ever could. They did not defeat capitalism. They ate it. Walk through Moscow today. It looks like a sci-fi film. Electric buses hum down the avenues. Self-driving taxis wait outside metro stations. Soviet technology companies plaster billboards with ads for cloud storage and neural networks. Huge digital displays flash New Year messages over brick walls built in the 15th century. Lenin still lies in his tomb, but right behind him, a massive screen advertises a state-made virtual assistant. History has a dark sense of humor. The tech race with America never stopped. It got faster. The original run to the moon did not end when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the dust in 1969. The Soviets refused to quit. Their own moon program was delayed by chaos in the 90s. But once the money came back, the engines fired again. In 2008, a Soviet cosmonaut finally stepped onto the lunar surface. Nearly 40 years late, Washington announced plans for a permanent base. Moscow built theirs. Beijing jumped in. By 2026, 3 separate research stations operate near the lunar South Pole: American, Soviet, Chinese. Not colonies, not cities. Small, dangerous, expensive outposts, but permanent. Astronauts and cosmonauts sometimes work together. Sometimes they competed for the same scientific sites. The moon had become what Antarctica once was. Mars was next. The United States wanted the first crewed mission. China wanted the same. The Soviet Union had proposed something different: a joint international expedition. Not because Moscow had suddenly abandoned competition. In 2026, the 3 great powers were negotiating whether humanity's first footprints on another planet would carry 1 flag or 3, control autonomous machines, generate propaganda, attack computer networks, and perhaps one day make decisions faster than human leaders could understand. The lessons of the 2022 blackout had not been forgotten. Washington, Moscow, and Beijing created a new institution, the International Digital Stability Commission. Its headquarters were located in neutral Vienna. Engineers from rival countries worked inside the same building. Their job was not to prevent cyber war completely. That was impossible. Their job was to prevent cyber war from reaching nuclear systems. Inspectors verified that certain critical networks remained physically isolated. Emergency communication channels were tested every month. AI systems could assist nuclear commanders. But international treaties required human authorization for strategic launches. The superpowers had finally written one rule into international law: no machine could legally decide to end human civilization. Whether every government would obey that rule was another question. There had been no decade of uncontested global dominance, no moment when Washington could imagine that ideological competition had permanently ended. Defense spending had remained higher. European alliances had remained central. American politics had developed around a permanent superpower rivalry. The Soviet Union was not viewed as an old enemy returning from history. It had never left. Ordinary people on both sides could see one another. Soviet teenagers watched American films. American gamers played against Soviet gamers online. The governments still competed. The populations were no longer separated by an iron curtain. There was a digital curtain, but it had holes. Millions of them. Germany was one country, but Berlin still carried the architecture of the Cold War. The old wall had become a memorial. Tourists walked along its surviving sections. Nearby, NATO offices coordinated European defense. Poland was now a full NATO member. After years of negotiation, it had joined in 2009 under an agreement that permanently restricted nuclear weapons on Polish soil. The expansion created a new frontier, not an iron curtain, something more flexible, more connected, and still heavily armed. Ukraine now stood between them. Independent since 2023, militarily non-aligned under its withdrawal treaty, Economically connected to both, its trains moved into Poland and Belarus. Its companies operated inside European and Soviet markets. Its universities worked with both sides. Kyiv had become something no one expected. A bridge, Independence Square, still contained memorials to the protests of earlier decades. But there had been no massive Russian invasion of Ukraine in this timeline, no annexation of Crimea in 2014, no full-scale war beginning in 2022. The Soviet Union had remained the state containing Russia and Ukraine inside the same federal structure until their negotiated separation. History had avoided one war. But that did not mean it had avoided war itself. Other conflicts had burned across the world. The Caucasus had experienced brutal fighting during the 1990s. Central Asian border disputes had killed thousands. Proxy competition between the superpowers had continued across the Middle East and Africa. A surviving Soviet Union had not made the world more peaceful. It had simply changed where the pressure was released. China had become the greatest unexpected consequence of Soviet survival. In our history, China watched the collapse of the Soviet Union and studied its mistakes. Chinese leaders concluded that political fragmentation could destroy a communist state. In this world, they watched something else. A Soviet system that survived by combining political control, economic reform, and federal compromise. Beijing learned from that too. China's rise continued, but its relationship with Moscow was never simple. They cooperated against American influence. They traded energy, technology, and military systems. But across Central Asia, they competed for resources, railways, markets, political influence. The alliance the West sometimes feared was actually a partnership filled with suspicion. Three superpowers now formed a geopolitical triangle. In August 2026, Maxim Volkov stands in a conference hall in Kyiv. He is 56. His hair is gray. Around him, engineers, diplomats, researchers, and government officials from dozens of countries prepared for the opening of the Global Artificial Intelligence Safety Conference. American delegates were there. Chinese delegates were there. Soviet delegates were there. Ukraine was hosting all of them. 35 years earlier, tanks had entered this city to prevent the Soviet Union from collapsing. Now, an independent Ukraine was hosting the three powers that had almost destroyed one another during the blackout of 2022. Maxim walked toward a window. Below, young people crossed the square. Some spoke Ukrainian, others Russian, English, Polish. Languages moved through the city as easily as data. Maxim nodded. And the Americans? Already inside. China? 10 minutes, he smiled. Good. The Soviet Union did not have to collapse in December 1991. On August 19, 1991, elite Soviet troops stood outside the Russian parliament waiting for the order to fire. But the coup leaders hesitated. In our timeline, they hesitated. They let the moment slip. But in this archive, the story turns. Gennady Yanayev signs the decree. Dmitry Yazov orders the tanks forward. Vladimir Kryshkov cuts the phone lines. Midnight. Moscow is cold. Rain falls on the asphalt. The diesel engines of the T-80 tanks roar. The barricades of buses and iron railings do not hold. They collapse under 30 tons of steel. The crowd of protesters scatters. Some run, some fight, but the army does not stop. By 3 in the morning, the Russian parliament is surrounded. The doors are blown open. Boris Yeltsin is arrested in his office. He is led out in handcuffs. No speeches on tanks. No democratic triumph. The state of emergency is absolute. The Soviet Union survives. But survival is not a victory. The country is bankrupt. The treasury is empty. The stores have nothing to sell. The citizens are cold. They are hungry. You cannot feed a family with nuclear missiles. The new leaders in the Kremlin know this. They are hardliners. But they are not stupid. They know that if they do not fix the economy, the next coup will come from the streets. They look across the southern border. They see Beijing. It opens parts of its economy. It accepts private enterprise. It loosens central planning. It allows greater power for the republics. It builds its own digital world.